So we started off with storage accounts yesterday. We did not really complete it, but we just were understanding the bare basic of it. So let's try to complete it today and then try to, let's say, take questions out there. So again, just to quickly summarize, we will need a tenant, which we have. We need a subscription. We need a resource group. Yes, we need a resource group, or we can create a resource group while creating the storage account itself. Shouldn't be an issue. Anything is okay. And then we need to go ahead and, let's say, create something called as a storage account in Azure. So the symbol of storage account again is something like this. And then I'm telling that storage account is a service in Azure that will help you store data that is there in an unstructured format. When I say unstructured format, anything which is non-relational in nature can come under this category, like videos, images, all that files, PDF files, text files, log files, and all these things can come under this particular category. And yesterday we were looking at two different parameters of the storage account. Yes, I mean that was the data type, but we were talking about two different parameters of the storage account, which is name and location. So we were telling that the name of a storage account, any given service name or any given storage account name out here, it should follow these three things out here. It should be unique, globally unique, 3 to 24 characters, and also no special characters allowed. So it is 3 to 24 character length, and also no special characters out here. And also one thing to be noted is that even a space is considered to be a special character, and it can only contain lowercase. So you cannot, yes. So you cannot put an uppercase number, or sorry, an uppercase letter out here. That's something that you cannot do. And also then we have something like a location. And then we went ahead, said which location do we want this particular storage service in. And then we were also talking about why do you really need to consider before you create a storage account in a particular location. And then we were telling that this location influences your latency. It's the amount of latency that you get influenced out here. So again, so here just to reiterate on that, you have a storage account service. Let's say that this particular storage account service holds all the data for an application called IRCTC. You have all the train information and all those information out here that is hosted in this particular storage account. And this storage account is nothing but an abstraction of a physical server, meaning it's just an extension of a physical server that is sitting in some different data center out here, some different data center of the world. And this is a physical server where your actual data is hosted, where all your data is actually stored in this particular physical server out here in the background. And Microsoft kind of maintains this particular physical server out here. So when you are a user, you go to this particular application called IRCTC. The request goes to the storage account diverts the request to the server gives you or gives the data back to the storage account, and then gives it back to the user out here. So this is the model in which it kind of works, and that's the reason the distance between the user and the server should be really close, or the business and your server should be really close, so that you can reduce the latency. You can reduce, let's say, the latency out here and improve the performance of your application. So this is called proximity to the business or proximity to the point of business out here. So location is how close or how far is your business from the server. This is one of the factor that kind of influences. And when you were to ask me, is it the only factor which influences? Not really. This is one of the major factor which influences. Second factor which influences is called geographical and political stability. geographical and political stability of a particular region. Let's imagine the same thing. Same service called IRCTC. Let's say it is not for India. Let's say it is for Afghanistan, Africa, whatever it is, right? The region is geographically or the region is politically very unstable. There is no government, there are a lot of wars and etc. If there are a lot of wars, right? Even Microsoft cannot guarantee that the data center will be up and running. Guys, can you please go on mute? You're really disturbing class out here. Yes, thank you. So again, if the data center is in a geographically unstable region or politically unstable region out here, there is no guarantee that your data center services will be up and running. In that case, you cannot really continue your business. You cannot, let's say, really okay. You cannot, let's say, really continue your business out here. So I, as a user, I'm not really worried about what is happening in the region. I, as a user, I'm just worried about, is this application really running? Is it really giving me the data out here? That's the only thing that I'm, let's say, worried about. So the political and also when I say geographical stability, free of earthquakes, geographically very stable, tsunamis and all that stuff. I don't want to put my data centers in a place which is highly, let's say, geographically unstable. That's the reason if you see the data centers and how they are established. So there is something called as Azure infrastructure map. Microsoft has done a great job in, let's say, giving such a kind of map out here for us. So let's wait for this to load. What this will tell you is that across the world, what kind of, kind of services they do have out here and so on and so forth. So they have, let's say, about 61 data centers that are spread across the world. And if you look at it, right, if you look at the amount of data centers, how they are spread mostly in Europe and US because most of the businesses are situated in Europe and US, and countries like, let's say, India and all these countries out here are mostly into service sector, so we support them. So if you look at this, and if you look at, let's say, if I just, let's say, okay, if I just swivel this out, most of the data centers, if you see, are in either US or either Europe. And if you look at, let's say, data centers in India, there are about three or four. So all these points basically are Indian data centers out here that basically are established. And if you go further east, the amount of data centers are reducing, let's say, by the number out there. These are the areas that are geographically stable and also politically stable. Both of the factors that influence the, let's say, the creation of your service. Also, one of the factors that we really look into is a cost of the service. See, when you create a storage account, when you start using it, you're going to pay something for Azure on an hourly basis. That payment that you pay to Azure on an hourly basis, it differs from one country or one region to the other because of the local taxation policies, because of a lot of things. Even your cost gets influenced. Even this is a factor that we see. So we combine all these factors. We say how close our business is. Even if our business is a little far, I'm okay with it. For example, let's say I'm a user in India. Let's say there's a website called Azure Speed Test. Let's go there. I'm a user in India. I want to understand if I send a request to a data center that is sitting in US, what is the latency versus Europe, what is the latency versus India, what is the latency? Let's check that out. So let's go scroll down and I'll say East US, North Europe, and also let's see data centers in, let's see Asia Pacific. I'll say Central India. So I'm choosing three data centers. I'm telling that one data center is in Central India, the other data center is in East US 2, the other data center is in North Europe. What this website will do is that this website will generate an artificial request, send it to those data centers, and just calculate what is the time that the request will respond back to you. So if I just scroll down, now if you see, this is the average latency that I'm actually getting. See, if I send it to a Central Indian data center, meaning if my storage account is there in Central India, the latency that I get is around 65-30 milliseconds. It also depends upon the internet connection that you're on, the bandwidth that you're on, and so on and so forth. If it's in North Europe, which is in Ireland, around 165, 170 milliseconds out here. Again, US 250 sorry, 253 milliseconds or 254 milliseconds out here. Again, the difference is in milliseconds. If you observe this, the difference is in milliseconds, not in seconds, and not even in minutes. Which means that if I'm a business situated in India, if I put my data center in India versus US, the latency is not that great. Meaning, as a user, you won't even really observe whether it is 28 or whether it's 222 milliseconds out here, until unless the amount of data that you're downloading is very high, is, let's say, super huge out there. So that's the reason the closeness to the business is something. Yes, it's an important factor, agreed, but other factors to consider are geographical and political stability out here. So that's the reason a company, before they host the data in the cloud, they think about all these factors, understand what is the cost that I'm going to pay, understand over a period of next 10 years how my data is going to perform, and then go ahead and plan, let's say, all these decisions out here. Reason being, once you create a storage account in a particular location, you cannot really change the location of that particular service. So if you want to change it, you'll have to take the backup of all your data, delete the storage service, recreate it, upload it back again. It's going to take a lot of time, let's say, to do all these things out. Reason being, we avoid going that route of, let's say, deleting things out and then recreating them out there as such. Yes, any questions still here that I can take before I move forward? Anyone, any questions still here? Latency is nothing but, for example, you are a user sitting in India, or you are a user who's just using, let's say, an application called Uber. You open that application, you send a request to a cab, it will go to that particular cab driver and the request will come back. So the time that is taken between you clicking that button and getting the request back is a latency. How fast or how slow the application is actually is. Greater the latency, slower the application. Lesser the latency, better the application is. All right, so let's go here and let's create again. Today I do not have a resource group. I've cleaned everything out. So let me create this out. And let's say that the subscription here is Visual Studio Enterprise subscription. I'll say this is a storage hyphen RG, the storage resource group. I'll say a location like East US2. This is a location that I'm selecting. I'll say next, and tags out here. Again, you can give multiple tags for identification purpose, optional in nature. So I'll just leave this for now. I'll say review and create this out. So it says that the validation is passed. Now it got created. And then I can now look for something called as a storage account. And now it's telling create a storage account and everything. I'll say, okay, great, create this out. And subscription, again, it's asking for the subscription. Also, it's asking for what is your resource group out here. I'll say, okay, fine, this is my resource group. Under the instance details, it's telling what is the name of the storage account. Again, I'll just give, say, something like dev irctc u or ECUS2, EU2, something like this. I am adding my name of the team, name of the project, and also the location in which I want to create this out in. And then I'll say that this is in a location called ECUS2. And then comes something very important called performance. Very simple, just imagine this. See, I am now telling that storage account is nothing but a virtual component that is there on the cloud where you want to store your data. But ideally, when you store your data, it is going into a server and getting stored in that particular server out here. Okay, this is what is happening. Now the server is a physical component which has, let's say, a hard disk, so on and so forth. And on the hard disk of a server is where your data will get stored. Now, very simple. Just go to a shop. Say I want to buy a laptop. The first thing shopkeeper is going to ask you is that, do you want a HDD hard drive or do you want an SSD solid state drive? You will ask very simple. You'll tell, okay, fine. I do not really know what is the difference between a HDD and a SSD. Can you help me out in figuring out what is it? Simple. Shopkeeper will say, you know what, solid state drive doesn't have a lot of mechanical components. The way the data gets written is faster. The way you can download the data, retrieve the data is faster. So in very layman terminology, SSD is very much faster than let's say HDD out here. This traditional hard drives that you get. So again, I'll ask, okay, fine, then is there a cost difference? Yes, there is a cost difference that you have to pay. There's a premium price that you have to pay when you go for SSD, solid state drive backed, let's say, systems out here. Same thing, I'm coming to Azure and I'm telling, you know what, I want to store your data. I want to store my data out here. SSD. Then I ask Azure, Azure will say the same thing. The rate at which you write and let's say retrieve the data are super fast when you go to SSD. When you go to HDD, it is a little less, though it is not as bad, but it's a little less when compared to SSD. That's where performance comes into picture. Wherein it's telling me there is something called standard, which is the standard, let's say, hard drives, premium backed up by for recommended for which require low latency scenarios. It's telling you have a standard, you have a premium. If you want to learn more about this, just click on this I button. And as soon as you click on this I button here, okay, there is a learn more option out here. And if you go here, this is where it's going to tell you. Let's scroll down, and there is something called performance out here. So standard options and all that stuff. There's something called performance, premium performance, and all these things out. So high performance workload, standard performance, and all these things out, wherein you can go ahead and understand how is it. Let's, for example, it's telling data is stored in a solid state drive, which is optimized for low latency scenarios. So you get a higher throughput, you get, let's say, something like the amount of data, it's the transfer rate is much faster and all these things when compared to the traditional hard disk drive, HDD out here. That's what it is telling you. But believe me, for most of the scenarios, like I have worked with a lot of clients out here right now, for most of the scenarios, we go for a standard tier. Premium A is very costly. B, there is not much of a difference between standard and premium for the amount of data that you write, for the amount of maintenance that Microsoft does in the background. There is not a lot of difference, let's say, in standard and premium. Also, premium is not supported in all the regions. In all the regions of the world, premium is not supported. It's a limited availability out here. So if you are a customer, if you are a client working with a client who needs premium, only then we go ahead, let's say, put this in premium out there. But in general scenarios, it's now telling recommended for most of the scenarios out here. Most of the scenarios we go for this particular account, and I'll say standard out here. Again, one question that I want to ask Microsoft is that, you know what, can I, now I'm in standard, later if I go and want to change it to premium, is that an option? Microsoft says no, it's not an option. You cannot change even this. So name, region, performance, these are something that you really cannot change after you create it out. But I mean, we'll go there. But I just want to take a quick pause. Any questions that I can take till here on what do you mean by a performance out here as such? Anyone, any questions that I can take till here? All right. So I'll choose standard for now. I'll go with standard now. I'm good with that. Then I come down to an option called redundancy. One of the most important options when you create a storage account. One of the most asked interview questions, that what do you know about redundancy in a storage account? What kind of redundancy is available when you go for a storage account service out here? Well, most asked interview questions. Why is it so? Let's understand that. Again, I am a user right now. I'm owning a business called IRCTC, same business out here, and all the data of IRCTC, like on the website, you see images and all these things. You see the details of your train and etc. All the details I'm storing inside this particular storage account service. And this storage account goes ahead in the background, stores this into a physical server that is sitting in a data center. In a data center, there can be thousands of servers. Your data might be hosted out of one of the servers that is available at that given point in time. I'll say, okay, great, this model is good, but I'm now asking Microsoft that, you know what, if I store my data in your server, you are giving me a guarantee that the data will be protected. Now I'm asking Microsoft is that, you know what if this server goes down? The server can go down. It's a physical component. You can have wear and tear you can have, let's say, a lot of wear and tear there. This physical servers, right? They are connected to, let's say, actual power points, plug points, and all that stuff. They need power supply. What if that power supply goes down? What if the air conditioning goes down and the server really gets heated up and all that stuff? This can be scenarios. These are scenarios that we, let's say, deal with on a daily basis out here. So if such a kind of a scenario happens, if the server is not available, very simple, your data will not be available. What will happen is that now, as a user, you request to the application called IRCTC. IRCTC in the background goes to that particular storage service, tries to get the data. It will try to reach out to that particular server. Server will not respond. Very simple. This application will give you a 404 error, unavailable, or a 403 error, or a 500 error. Very simple. For an end user, what does this mean? That means that at that point in time, you cannot use the application. Very simple. If you are not able to use the application, I am losing revenue as a business every minute. Imagine applications like IRCTC. Every minute, lakhs of people actually go and book their tickets out there. So even if the application is down for a minute, I lose a lot of money in rupees, right? I lose a lot of money out there. So out of the concern, I now ask Microsoft that what happens in this scenario. Microsoft says, don't worry. That's the reason you have an option called redundancy. And the least available redundancy, the starting, let's say, level of redundancy is called LRS, which is called locally redundant storage. Locally redundant storage. So if let's go there, let's go to that option. So let's come here and let's click on, let's say, redundancy. The very first thing is called locally redundant storage out here. So let's go there. What really happens out here is that, again, in a data center, you will be having not just one server, you will be having thousands of servers. Let's say this square box that you see is a data center out here, and in this particular data center, you're not having one, you're having many servers out here. I'm just putting in three because of the space limitation, but this can be 3,000, this can be 30,000, it can be, like, depending upon the size of the data center and so on. When you put a data, and when you create a storage account and start storing, or when you create a storage account in LRS and start storing your data, Microsoft says, as and when you give me a file, let's say I'm talking about a very simple file, you're storing this file into the storage account. As and when you're giving me the file, I'll go ahead and store this file on a physical server. Not only one physical server, I'll copy this file into server 2 and server 3 as well. Meaning, if you are sorry, if you are going for an LRS option in the same data center, I will give you 3 copies of your data the very minute. Meaning, I uploaded today, this second, the very second, server 1, server 2, server 3, all of the 3 get this particular data hosted. Meaning, you're not giving one copy, you're now getting 3 copies. You're giving one copy to Microsoft, you're getting 3 copies in return. So if you look at this, again, if I just go back there, I click on redundancy, and they have great diagrams out here. So if I just go here into the documentation of redundancy, it's telling Azure stores multiple copies of your data so that it is protected from planned and unplanned events, including transient hardware failures, network or power outages, and massive natural disasters. I'll say, okay, great. Now tell me, what is LRS? It's telling locally redundant storage. Let's come down, and this is what it's telling me is that in one data center called East US2, I would have around 3 different copies of my data that's being created in the same storage account in the same data center. I'll say, okay, fine, that's great. But as a business, I want to know what is the guarantee that my data is available? Give me a percentage. Tell me, out of every 100 times if a user is sending a request, how many times will you give me the data? This is a simple number that I need as a business. Microsoft says okay, fine. For that we have something called as SLA, service level agreement. See, when you sign up your account with Azure, right, you do a sign up, you say I agree with all your terms and etc. You sign for something called as an SLA, service level agreement, telling that okay, fine, I agree with this. Microsoft says if you go with LRS, I will give you a guarantee that these many times your data will be available, which is 99.999 to the times of 11. So 99.11 times 9 is your data will be available. So out of every 100 requests, these many requests will successfully return back with a particular data. 0.00000001 times is when your data will not be available. That's the guarantee that I give you in something known as LRS. This is what I'll give you with LRS out here. Also, as I said, your data, as and when you upload it, you are giving one copy to Microsoft. Microsoft is replicating that thrice. Three different copies out here in the same data center. Since this is happening at the very same second, this is called as a synchronous operation. It's called synchronous copy. That's what the documentation also tells you, is that LRS is a low cost durable option. LRS protects your data from risks and all these things out. A write request to your storage account that is using LRS happens synchronously. The write operation returns successfully only after the data is returned to all the three replicas. Meaning, give one data, I'll replicate it thrice and send it back to you across and so on and so forth. I'll say great, good enough, but I still have concerns because see, you are telling that you'll protect from natural calamities and all these things out, like flooding events and all these things out. I am a business right now, which is being used by a lot of people. This business is being used, let's say, really by a lot of people out here. I don't want to take chance. I want to make sure that I am protected from all the events. For example, what if the entire data center is down? This can be a scenario because of some kind of a flooding or some kind of a natural disaster. What if the entire data center is not operational? Microsoft says, don't worry. I have one more option for you. If you are, let's say, concerned about this one, go to an option called ZRS, Zone Redundant Storage. Local is just a data center. Zone is something like this. Let's scroll down and let's see this, which is ZRS, Zone Redundant Storage. Again, when I'm saying I'm creating a data center in East US2, see, East US2 is an entire region. It's the entire coastline of, let's say, the United States out there, which can have multiple data centers, which will have multiple data centers out here in East US2. There can be multiple data centers out there. Microsoft is telling, when you give me one copy, I'll give you the first copy in data center 1, second copy in data center 2, third copy in data center 3. Three different copies, not in a single data center, but in multiple data centers out here, so that your data is highly available. Your data, let's say, is highly available out here. So Microsoft says, this is what I give you. I again ask for a percentage. Microsoft says, okay, fine. If you're talking about percentages, it's 12 times 9. It's 99.999 to the power of, let's say, 12 out there. This is the amount of times that I'll make it available. Also happens synchronously, meaning one copy of your data will be, let's say, replicated thrice in the very second out there. This is synchronous in nature out here. One more thing that I want you all to observe is I selected ZRS, good enough. But if I go here, click on this one, See, there are two things out here. If you click on a region, any service will have two things. One is a recommended region. The other, or let's say the other is non-recommended regions out here of Microsoft. Let's say I select India. The recommended region is what? Central India. Other regions are South India and let's say West India. Let's say I go with South India. As and when I go with South India, now I'll say Microsoft that you know what, I want to select an option called ZRS. Not there. Reason being, not all the regions of the world have all the data centers across, or not all the regions of the world support zone redundancy. Meaning, maybe in South India there is only one data center. That's the reason Microsoft is not giving you an option called ZRS. And that's the documentation what it talks about. Is that ZRS is not really available in all the regions. You'll have to understand there's something called region availability. Let's look at that option as well. Okay, I'll show that option as well. So ZRS has something called region availability. So for example, it says Azure region pairs. Choose the right region, and it kind of tells you all these things out. So for example, if I go into let's say something like India, let's see India, and now it's telling you know what, these are the three data centers that I have, which is South India, Chennai, South Central India, which is Hyderabad, which is coming soon. Then you have Pune. These are the regions that are available, and then it's telling what kind of an availability that I'll give you, which kind of let's say options that you have out here. Do you want to go for this particular region, or do you want to go for a different region, and so on and so forth out here. So it's now telling available with three zones. Here nearest with zone coming up in central India. So this is also now trying to let's say come up with a zone. South Central India, which is in Hyderabad, is still coming up. They're still constructing that particular data center. So it's not still available for all the customers out there. So it's now telling you that okay, fine, you can choose depending upon what you need. And if you are a customer who needs something like zone availability, then go for Central India out here. So if I switch this to Central India, ZRS is available. So ZRS also depends upon the region in which you are creating it. The region should support something called zone redundancy. How do you decide? I'm just going inside the documentation. I'm just following the links of the documentation. It's telling choose something called region best. I'm going to the region, understanding whether that particular region has something called zone availability out there as such. So these are, so LRS will give you three copies in the same data center. ZRS is going to give you three copies in three different data centers in the same region. In the same region out here. One more question the business can come, client can come up with these questions is that what if the entire region is not available? Highly unlikely, but still I don't want to keep it open. Highly unlikely, this is very highly unlikely that the entire ECS goes down. No, at least there is one data center which is up and running. But my client is telling, okay, fine. What if three data centers are down on that given day? And unfortunately, our data is sitting in all those three data centers out there. Then very simple, your application will not be available during that particular given day. That's the reason Microsoft gives you another option. Let me switch it back to ECS out here again, which is called as Geo Redundant Storage, GRS. Geo Redundant Storage means something like this. Let's scroll down further into something called again here also if you see it's telling what are all the regions ZRS is supported. These are the regions where ZRS is supported. Let's scroll down and then it's telling you redundancy in a secondary region. Now it's telling for application requiring high durability, you can choose additional copy of your data to be stored in the secondary region that is hundreds of miles away from the primary region. Meaning both the regions are separated by different let's say or a good amount of distance. And here it is telling you that if you go for GRS, geo redundant storage, there will be two regions I'm considering. Now I'm talking about multiple region pairs. Until now, I did not talk about multiple regions. I just spoke about one region and multiple zones inside the region. Now I'm talking about multiple regions out here in the form of primary and secondary region. Let's say you choose a location called East US2. The secondary location is something that you cannot choose. Secondary location is not, let's say, in our control to choose. This is Microsoft which will choose for you. Usually, it will be a region pair, meaning if you say it is East, Microsoft will give you either a central or West, opposite directions. So Microsoft, let's say, will give you something like West US. Microsoft is now telling that, okay, fine. If you are giving me one copy of your data, meaning one file, in the primary region, which is East US2, I will give you an LRS, meaning 3 copies of your data in the primary data center, but I will also replicate this data across a different data center sitting in a different region, and and even there I will give you what, LRS out here, meaning now you get 6 copies of your data, 3 sitting in the primary, 3 sitting in the secondary, so that if primary is not available, you can do something called as a fail over, meaning you will simply tell your application that, you know what, don't go to East US2 anymore, go to West US2 and get your data. This option called failover is available in GRS methodology, in a geo redundant storage methodology out here, which means that you're simply switching the point where you need to, let's say, get the data from. You're telling, instead of, let's say, East US, go to West US, grab that data. I'm good with that. It's called as a failover scenario. This is used for something called BCP, business continuity planning, meaning if, let's say, the data center is not available in the primary, what if the data center is not available, then it's telling, okay, fine, go ahead, get in the secondary region, and here Microsoft is giving you the highest availability, which is around 99.16 times 9. That's the amount of availability that you get in a given year. In a given year, out of every 100 requests, 99.16 times 9 is when your request can come back, and the 0.000016 zeros and then 1 is where the data will not be available. That's the guarantee what Microsoft is giving you. And finally, they have also come up with one more option, which is called GZRS, Geo Zone Redundant Storage. The only difference between GRS and GZRS is that, just observe this diagram. In GRS, you are getting LRS in the primary region and also LRS in the secondary region, 6 copies of the data. Even in GZRS, you will get 6 copies of the data, but it's going to do a ZRS in the primary region. What does this mean? Is very simple. Is that in the primary region, if one of the copy is not available, you don't have to again go to, let's say, your secondary region to read your data. You don't have to do that. You can simply go ahead, grab your data from the secondary or the tertiary data center that is available in the same zone. Again, what benefit it gives you is that earlier I was talking about something called failover. See, when you initiate a failover, in order for your application to read from a secondary endpoint or from a secondary location, you'll at least have to give it around 30 minutes of time. Because, see, when you talk about geo redundant storage or GZRS out here, the replication of the data is not synchronous, it is asynchronous. Reason being, Microsoft needs some time to go ahead, grab your data and copy it to a secondary data center. The time it takes depends upon the amount of data that you have, somewhere between 10 to 45 minutes. That's the amount of time Microsoft will take to go ahead and replicate your data. And that's the reason it's telling that when you do a failover, I will firstly have to, let's say, go ahead, make this data available, make sure that all the data is copied, and only then I can let you use this particular secondary endpoint. So in GZRS, if one copy is not available, you do not have to do a failover right away. Failover should only be done if all the three copies are not available, which is again a very unlikely scenario. So you avoid that 30-minute downtime for your application. Meaning in that failover time rate, when you're trying to, let's say, go to a secondary region, your application is not available because the data is not available. So you are avoiding this particular time which the failover takes. So that's the reason GZRS is, let's say, a slightly better option when compared to GRS out here. Again, my question to Azure is that okay, fine, I will start with LRS. Can I switch myself to GRS or let's say ZRS at a later point in time? Yes, you are allowed to do that. This is something that you're allowed to do. And if you switch, it's not going to take a lot of time. I'll take about 30 seconds now to switch you. So you don't you don't have to worry about it. You can start with LRS and then go with the other options like GRS or ZRS or something like that. Later we can change. This is the option later we can change. Name region performance. These are the options that you cannot really change. But redundancy is an option that you can later change. You can go with let's say LRS and then later go to GRS or something like that. Yes. Good, please. Hmm. Yes. How do we correct? How do we predict? How do we change it? Good question. Is that again? Every region has its own history of accidents or history of something like that. In order to look at that, what we do is that there is a website called status.azure.com, which will tell you what is the health of a service in a particular region. For example, I am taking a service in ECS2 today in this given second. If you just go and search for something called storage accounts are available in a region called ECS2, meaning these are available. Also, what do we do is that we go for something called Azure Status History. If I just click on this, and let's say I am choosing a region called ECS2, I want to understand what really happened, how, let's say, bad the situation was, and what did or how did Azure really remediate this out. This will give you everything. For example, the recent incident happened on 8/18, which is 18th of August. So if you look at this, this impacted services like Azure ML, meaning machine learning. You have something called HSM, Azure Virtual Machines, database services like MySQL and all these things, but not storage accounts out there. So it's telling you there is an impact. Yes, there is an impact. Each and every region has its own impact, and they let's say take all those impacts, they place it here, telling this month this was the amount of downtime, or this was the let's say incidents that happened. What went wrong? Why did it go wrong? And what did we address? How did we respond? And how much of time did it take? So depending upon all these factors, you can go for a region out here, and inside a region again these are the factors that will help you decide whether you want to go for let's say LRS or whether you want to go for GRS and etc. And normally the recommendation is that when we start working in an organization, production data, meaning data that is on a live environment, we recommend keeping it in GRS or GZRS, the best available option out there that is available. We would want to go for something like that. So if you put it in GRS and GZRS, then you can plan your business better. Like you can say, I have a BCP plan, or I can do a failover at a later point in time, and so on and so forth. And for non-production data, meaning data that you are testing, data that your organization internally is testing, not high priority, you can put it in LRS or ZRS or something like that. Because a downtime there, you can afford that. But production data is something that we, kind of say, put it in, let's say, a good amount of tier like GRS or GZRS and so on and so forth. Yes, we do a GZRS usually in a live environment, or again, it also depends upon the budget that a project really has. because when you go for GRS versus LRS, there is a cost difference that you kind of pay. So it depends upon the budget. It depends upon the target audience, like how many users in a given minute are using my particular, let's say, application. Depending upon all those factors, we kind of decide this out. But 99% of the times I have used, let's say, GZRS or GRS out here. Earlier, we did not have an option called GZRS. This is an option that was introduced in 2021. But before that, we only had GRS out there. So we usually went for GRS as such. Again, the cost is something that you also need to, let's say, look at. Again, if you want to understand how the cost is, let's say, reflecting, just go to a website called Azure Price Calculator. There is this website called Azure Pricing Calculator, and just scroll down. And I want to, let's say, look at a price that is incurred for a service called storage account. I'll go here. I'll say view, and again, price is something. Let's see. Let's scroll down. Let's scroll down. Let's see where is the yes. I'll just convert it into Indian national rupee so that I'll be able to simply show you this one. So it's telling that this is a storage account sitting in a region called ECS2, and we'll talk about what is the type of a storage account that you go for. Tier, I want to say it is a standard tier, and let's say this is yes, it's fine, not a problem. It's a standard tier storage account that I want to go for, and there is something called access tier we'll talk about. Redundancy, LRS. If you go for LRS, and if you are storing about 1000 GB, the assumption is that you are storing about 1000 GB out here. And if I just scroll down and calculate the price, this would be around 1745 rupees that I pay per a month. This is a monthly cost that I pay. If my storage account is in East US, if this is sitting in, let's say, an LRS tier, if I change the region, let's say it is not East US, let's say it is like something like Central India. Let's put that. Price slightly reduced, 1689. Maybe our taxes there are lesser. Let's say if I go to another region in, let's say, Europe or something like that. Let's see, UK South or UK West. There's a change in the price. Not a lot, but there's still a change in the price. But let's say I put it in ECS too. Cheapest 1553. If I select an option like ZRS, price is increasing 1900 rupees. If I go for GRS, see the amount of difference. It's around 4700, let's say 1 rupees out here, compared to around 17 or 1500 rupees that you are getting in LRS. I could say it is almost 3.5 times what I'm paying, let's say, in LRS out here. It's costly. It's a costly option out there. Reason being, see, Microsoft is not only telling I'll store your data, Microsoft is also telling I'll keep your data available. I'll copy it in a secondary region, and also you can use the secondary region. You can, let's say, in a scenario, you can also use the secondary region out here. That's the reason I'll charge you a premium cost of about 4701 rupees if you're going ahead and storing this out. Again, if you calculate all these things, monthly cost 4701 rupees. If you store about 1000 GB capacity, this is for 1000 GB. Again, if your need increases and you put in 2000 GB out here, cost also increases out there. So it just depends upon how much of data you have, which region you need, how do you have, and all that stuff. Depending upon this, again, we do not calculate this one. It's an architectural decision telling what is the cost and etc. But sometimes if you're working for, let's say, a startup company or something, you do not have a formal team like an architecture and etc. They will rely upon DevOps engineers to do all these calculations. So we just need to have an understanding of how this is calculated, a bare basic understanding of how this is calculated. And finally, once I select all these options, I will go into something called advanced. And here I am not, let's say, changing any options. One thing that we have to understand is something called access tier. That is something that we need to understand once we create a storage account. So just say next. There is something called networking. Just leave this option open. Data protection. We'll come back to that once we look into a topic called soft delete. Encryption, just leave it the way it is. Tags, you can also attach tags to your storage account, individual resources. Then say review. Now it's going to give you all the options out here that you've selected. And it's telling that I'm running validations. Once the validation is done, it's telling, okay, fine, you want to create this out. I'll say hit the create button. Uh, it is not an EC2 instance in AWS. We can compare it with an S3 bucket in AWS. It's like an S3 bucket in AWS out here. It's a storage. EC2 is like a virtual machine in Azure. Yes, any questions still here that I can take?
Hi.
Just a second, sorry. I'm taking a question offline. I'll just come back to you. Just a second, Deepak.
Yes, sure.
Go ahead, please. Hmm. Where we need to write that again, if you select it as GRS, after you create a storage account service, you will have an option called failover. I'll show that to you on how do you initiate a failover and so on. Yes, Deepak, please go ahead. You had a question.
Yeah, actually, I have a question from user management. Yesterday, I think I had a mail
Okay.
where I got some few replies. So can I
Yeah,
share
I
my
have
screen and
sent
make
an
it clear?
an email back to you once again. Can you just check that out? I have given
Yeah,
some suggestions out there.
yeah, I have checked it.
Uh, okay, just check that out. And if you still
Is
have a
that?
question, right? Yeah, sorry. Good.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
I was
please,
telling,
please continue.
if you still have a question there, right? I will prefer to connect with you
Mm-hmm.
personally. So just let me know if you are free in the evening. I'll send you a link and we can connect
Okay,
and we
okay,
can
that
just discuss.
will be great.
Yeah.
Yes, sure, sure.
So
You can let me
yeah,
know when you are free.
sure, definitely. Just give me time till the evening. I'll connect with you post 6 p.m. today.
Sure, that will be fine for me.
Okay. Thank you.
Post
Yes, any more
6 p.m.
questions?
Okay.
Yes, post 6 p.m. Correct. I'll just send an
Thank you.
email across and we'll schedule a meeting there. Thank you.
Sure, sure. Thank
Yes.
you.
Yes, any more questions here?
Yeah,
Again,
hello.
if you
Kiran,
do
this
here,
is bit confusing.
I'm sorry. Can you come again, please?
This is bit confusing, Kiran, like which redundancy we have to select.
Okay, which redundancy you have to select? So for that, please read through this article once more on what
Okay.
is the redundancy option that you have. Just go through the complete article and also use the video and please let me know what is, let's say, or what is the topic that you're confused about, and we'll take the questions there.
Okay, means this client will be giving the option or we have to tell them.
Again, it completely depends. Sometimes we will have to tell them, sometimes they will tell us. Depends upon how technically sound your client is or how technically not sound your client is. Sometimes we will have to tell them. When say we, I'm talking about an architecture team of Azure. Again, this is something that architects kind of decide depending upon the cost and all these things out. But again, if you are working in a very small organization like a startup company, then you might not have an architect. That's where you will have to decide, telling that, okay, fine, go for this option. This is the amount that you pay and all these things out. Yes, any more questions here, guys?
Hello.
Go ahead, please, Akhil. Just a second. Go ahead, please.
So, like as you said, we can switch between these redundancy types, right?
Mm, correct.
So, like a second, if you choose a particular region where ZRS is not available, so in that
Okay.
case, how's this switch happen between these redundancy types?
Very simple. You won't be able to switch to ZRS. You'll only be able to switch between LRS and GRS out there. So if the option is not available, Microsoft will simply not let you to switch between, let's say, LRS and so on. And that's the very
Okay.
reason I'm creating my storage account in a region which supports ZRS, so that if I want to switch later, I will switch later.
Okay.
Yes, I'll take a question offline. Yes, correct. Yes, yes. Still, you will need to pay entirely. If no, sorry, no. Good question. Is that you are doing 1000 GB slab for a storage? You are using, let's say, about 10 MB out there. You'll only pay for that particular 10 MB. Again, here, if you look at it, For the calculator, I'm telling that I have 1000 GB out here. But when I created a storage account, I didn't tell what is the data I need. I never told that. I just went and created it out. It's a scalable model, meaning the amount of data you use, the same thing you pay out there. No need to pay. Again, I'm not selecting 1000 GB. I'm not telling that I need a 1000 GB capacity. I'm just telling, okay, fine, I want a storage account. And if you were to ask me what is the maximum capacity of data you would store in a storage account, that would be around 500 terabyte. It's a 500 terabyte storage that you get in a particular storage account out there. So I'm just calculating this for a cost purpose. So let's say you're only using 10 GB. You're paying around 1.598 rupees. Again, your cost also is like, this is for calculation purpose. So I'm just giving a proper number. Sorry, this is the capacity. This is 10. And if I just scroll down, 208 rupees out here. So this for calculation purpose. But when you create a storage account, you nowhere mention that you nowhere mention the capacity that you want. It's a maximum capacity they give you, and depending upon your usage, they'll go ahead and give something. Yes, any more questions that I can take? All right. So the deal here is that please go ahead, read about data redundancy, one of the most important options out here. Just go through this documentation, understand what is data redundancy, and just create one simple storage account. And after you create it, just for practice, after you're done with creating this out, delete the entire resource group, because this will, let's say, get charged. So since you're not using the storage account in, like any which ways, delete the resource group by going to delete option and select the name of the resource group, like copy the name and paste it here and say delete. If you delete a resource group, your resource group and also the storage account that is sitting inside it, both will get deleted of the research. Right. Okay, so so that's it from mine today, guys. If there are any questions, please park it. We'll take it in the morning tomorrow and get started. Thank you and have a good day. Thank you.